So, I am again privileged and excited to introduce our next speaker. Andrew Root came to Luther Seminary from Princeton Theological Seminary, where he earned a PhD in practical theology with a focus on children, youth, and family ministry. Previous to that time at Princeton, Andy earned a Master of Divinity degree from Fuller Theological Seminary and a bachelor's degree from Bethel University. Andy has worked in a variety of settings and collected a number of experiences, including serving as a gang prevention counselor, a congregational youth outreach director, staff member of Young Life, and as a confirmation teacher, which he said made gang prevention look easy. A prolific writer, Andy is the author of 5 books, including most recently The Theological Turn in Youth Ministry, co-authored with Kenda Creasy-Dean, and The Children of Divorce. In addition, he has 4 more, that's right, 4 more currently scheduled for publication, and others in the pipeline. He writes so much that if he weren't also a really nice guy, most of us would hate him. But Andy also speaks throughout the country and abroad, regularly appearing in places as disparate as Norway and Australia, England and South America. If you're wondering why all these people want to hear Andy, well, sometimes I wonder that. You will soon learn that he is, very seriously, I think, one of the most astute students of contemporary culture I know. And he has a remarkable ability to see culture through the lens of theology, and just as important, to view and reconsider theology in light of our culture. Please join me in welcoming Andy Root.
All right, it's a pleasure to be here and to be with you. And I'm going to jump in because Dave said that I have a very limited time and that he will pull me away if I go a second over, so I'm going to begin. And I actually told him to undersell me so that, he would say, this is the last guy we could think of, so here he is. And so then you would come up to him later and be like, hey, that wasn't too bad. So thanks for the introduction, Dave, but you made it harder for me. So what I want to actually talk about with my time today is this thing called identity. And what I mean by that is answering this question, who am I? And I actually think for younger generations of people, maybe the driving issue, the driving task for them is to answer this question, who am I? And I think that we're finding certain cultural changes with it, and I think it has huge ramifications on how the church will imagine its ministry in the future. But let me begin by telling you just a quick story that in my family, my wife is actually the talented person. And at the seminary that we were going to, she actually won the seminary's preaching award. And it actually came with a good substantial amount of money, and they wanted you to take this money and travel abroad with it, with the whole idea that you would have an international experience and it would make you a more well-rounded person in the pulpit. So a lot of people had just taken the money and gone to Cambridge or Oxford and spent a semester there. But a few people just before us had taken the money and actually traveled around the world with it. And when we read that, we said, yeah, that's what we're doing. We're traveling around the world. So we took this money and we took everything we owned, and put it in a 6x10 storage site and flew west. Now, we were leaving from Los Angeles, and we figured, we're going west, so we better do God's will and stop in Hawaii for 10 days. So we, went to Hawaii, spent some time in Hawaii, bounced over to Fiji for a few days, and then finally ended up at Melbourne, Australia, at the University of Melbourne, at Whitley College, and we lived in this dank flat right on their campus. It was so disgusting that the carpet actually gave us athlete's foot. Now, why you needed to know that, I have no idea, but I thought I would just gross you out. But it was actually in this little apartment, this damp, little, gross apartment, that my wife and I picked our identities, that we chose who we would be, that we were in our early 20s, we had just finished seminary, we had no idea what was next, and it was there in this damp, dirty apartment with nothing on TV but an all-day cricket match. And believe me, people, I tried. It is boring. The only thing on TV that we decided who we would be. My wife decided that she would become an ordained pastor. I decided I would try to become an academic theologian, and we did it. Church community, thousands of miles away. Family, thousands of miles away. The only thing we had was ourselves, and that day we picked our identity. So like I said, I think the task for young people is to answer this question, who am I? And there's at least this illusion that we get to do this for ourselves. And this is a really new historical phenomenon. I mean, most historians actually tell us that it appears that people really didn't ask this question, at least bluntly, until really after the 17th century. that even personal journals aren't really discovered until after the 17th century. There's exceptions to the rule, of course, like Augustine's Confessions, but they think that most people didn't sit around and think, well, who am I? What am I going to do with my life? What's the point of me being me? You were pretty much told who you were. Once a peasant, always a peasant. Your community pretty much told you who you would be. But now we live in a world where there's at least this illusion that we get to decide it, that it becomes our task to figure this out. Now, I got to warn you, I'm going to show you a diagram right now, and my wife says that you have to be on drugs to understand my diagrams. So what I'm saying is smoke them if you got them. All right? You got it? All right, so here's the diagram. So what some social theorists actually tell you, see, you're seeing it, you're like, oh my gosh, I do need LSD. Where is it? But most social theorists actually tell us that for most of human history, we were present-looking people, but to live into the future, we were actually past-looking. That in the present, we were actually past-looking people, and that we got there through a tradition, and so we were bound by space and time in one single narrative. But after the Industrial Revolution and into modernity, many social theorists actually think we become future-oriented people, that we are actually directed towards the future. Now, let me help this make a little bit of sense, and maybe biographically make a little sense. For instance, I think we are so future-oriented people right now that and this is shameful to say, but I literally do not know the names of my great-grandparents. I don't know their names. And my grandma could tell me, I could call her and she would tell me their names, but actually she's told me their names many times, but I don't remember them because they make no difference in my life at all. That my point of my life is not to correlate my way back to the root way of doing things. And as I raise my son, my point is not to help him live in to the tradition and the practices of our way of life. My goal is to help him become a self-differentiated individual that can grasp his future with both hands. That we become these future-oriented people. Now, I know all of you have probably seen the DreamWorks animated film, The Prince of Egypt. You know what I'm talking about, the historical documentary about the Exodus? So this was I think this was early 2000s, late 90s, Spielberg does the Exodus story. And my son, just like me, loves TV. So while he was 3 or 4, we allowed him to watch about 20 minutes of The Prince of Egypt every day, and he was really into it. And it actually became a huge existential crisis for my wife and I, because one day after watching it, he turned to us and he said, "Mommy, Daddy, I don't like Moses. I like the Pharaoh." And we said, well, no, wait, no, and that's not the point. You see, Pharaoh's the bad guy. You're not supposed to like him. I know. I don't like Moses. I like Pharaoh. And his mother, pastor, and father, theologian, are freaking out. Oh, my gosh, what did we do wrong? But we were allowing him to watch this one day, and I'm sure this is historically accurate. If you remember the scene of the movie where Ramses and Moses are teenagers. Of course, this is exactly historically accurate. And they go on a chariot drag race around Cairo, and this is actually how the Sphinx loses its nose. You remember this scene? And at the end of the scene, of course, they've made mayhem all over Cairo, and the ruling pharaoh at the time calls in Ramses, the prince who will be the pharaoh, and he berates him. How dare you? Don't you understand, Ramses, that one weak link in a chain destroys a dynasty? Now basically get in line. And I'm sitting there watching my tow-headed little boy watch this scene and realizing that is the last thing that I'm doing with this boy. The last thing that I'm doing is helping him live into this tradition, this way of life of generations of the roots. That's not what I'm doing. My goal is to help him become an individual, to give him the resources to answer this question for himself: who am I? So I think this becomes the task of younger generations of people, to answer this question, who am I? But how do they do it? Well, I actually think, and Sigmund Bauman, who is a German social theorist, actually says this. He says, the day the all-encompassing community was punctured. In other words, the day we were no longer past-looking people, but future-oriented people, the day the all-encompassing community was punctured was the day talk of identity began. In other words, we didn't ask this question until now. But how did we answer this? Maybe let's go back to the heyday of the church, the 1950s. And how would you answer this question, who am I? I mean, it's a new question in and of itself, but how would you answer it at this time? Well, I think there are actually 2 building blocks that you used to answer this question, who am I? And the first really was your skills and abilities. In other words, that you defined who you were through your skills and your abilities. And you figured these out around 15 or 16. You figured out what you were good at. This is why we tend to assume that adolescence is the time of identity formation, because in adolescence you figure out what you're good at. You figure out you're really good at math, or you're really good at breaking into cars, and that becomes your identity. So if you're really good at math, you study math, You go to college, you become a math major, you graduate with a math degree, you start applying for jobs, and you get a job, and when you meet somebody at a dinner party, you say, "Hi, my name is Bob, and I'm an accountant." That's who I am. That your identity really revolved around your work, that your work really set the terms for how you understood yourself. Now, if that was one building block, the second was your love. It wasn't just your work, but your love also became this building block of how you would formulate this self-definition. So somewhere between the ages of 15 and 20, you'd find your sweetheart. You'd fall in love. You'd have 2.5 kids demographically. That's why if you're a fan of The Simpsons, Maggie never grows up, so they're always 2.5. You'd have your 2.5 kids. You'd buy a house. You'd start volunteering for the PTA. You'd start coaching Little League. And when you met that same person at the dinner party, you would say, "Hi, my name is Bob, and I'm an accountant, but I'm also a husband or a wife." So your love helped you define who you were. Now, what's really interesting is that, of course, Sigmund Freud, who, if you know anything about Freud, you know that what got him up in the morning wasn't the thought of thinking about how people were healthy or not. I mean, what got Freud up in the morning was thinking about why people had dreams their genitalia fell off. Like, that was a good day for Freud. He was really excited about that. But Freud wrote very little about healthy people. But the little he wrote about healthy people, he actually said, the healthy person is the person who can work and can love. This kind of late Victorian projection into this period that the healthy person is the person who could work and could love. Now, you could have a pretty solid definition of yourself. You could answer this question, who am I, and have it set for a pretty significant period of your life and have it be pretty solid, because work and love, for the most part, were solid foundations to build your identity on. Now, here's the problem. I think in our cultural context, these very realities have melted. In other words, work and love are not what they used to be. That they may not be the same firm foundation to build an identity on that they once were. And they may not be as dependable, and it may lead to more fluidity in how people come up and answer this question, who am I? For instance, just lately, I think, and in the last number of decades, we've seen the melting of work. I mean, it's almost absurd now to imagine that in our churches, that a young person at 15 picks what she wants to do with the rest of her life and will do it. We almost laugh at them naively, like, yeah, just wait. Wait to see what happens. And how many people do we know in our churches or in our communities that say things like, well, you know, I'm 40 and I'm still trying to figure out what I want to do when I grow up. Which doesn't mean that they're uncommitted or that they're lazy. It just means that the workforce is a very fluid place. And you were doing what you really wanted to do for 3 or 4 years, well, then you lost that job, or then there were downsizes and then you had to move on. So it's almost really rare, even in our cultural context, for you to get a job in your major. I mean, who goes through college and gets a job in their major? What's the point of college? You don't go to college to learn the skills that you're going to do in the workforce. You go to college to learn how to drink. I mean, that's the point of it. And you put your parents in debt to learn how to drink bad beer. That's the point of going to college. And even in our churches, there are fewer and fewer gold watches anymore. You know, the idea of the gold watch, that once you worked for one corporation for 40 or 50 years, usually 50 years, that you got a gold watch. With corporate mergers, technological changes, and downsizing, it's very, very rare that you will work for one company longer than 10 or 15 years. Now, the statistics are radically changing, and you can find different studies that will say different things. But at least one reputable study actually says that Americans change careers, not jobs, careers, every 20 months on average. That every 20 months, Americans change careers. Like you were selling insurance, now you're in higher education. That you're doing these radically different things. Now, the pep talk that I think that parents used to give their kids when they would drop them off at their first day of university, maybe a generation or two ago, is the pep talk used to be, figure out what you're good at and become as good at that as you can. Go deep, become the best at that. Now I think when we drop our kids off the first day at the freshman dorm, we say things like, well, don't get too bogged down. Stay open to things. And for God's sakes, don't become a philosophy major, whatever you do. That's always a cheap shot on philosophy majors. I apologize for that. But, you know, do something in computers, because we have no idea what the job market's going to look like in 10 years, let alone 15 years. I mean, we have no idea what it's going to look like. So we just simply say, well, do the best that you can. So work really becomes about this. We've seen this melting. It becomes about adaptability. But so too does love. Love is not necessarily what it used to be. It was once assumed that there was one love for every person. But now, with late marriage, on average, people not getting married until they're 28, sometimes later than that, and with a high divorce rate, it's very unlikely that people in our congregations will fall in love and stay with that person forevermore. That late marriage and a high divorce rate means there's fluidity in our very conceptions of love itself. Now, before this feels like it's just a demographics analysis, this has huge ramifications on the church. Now, I don't know if any of you have seen Robert Wuthnow, who's a sociologist of religion at Princeton, his book called Religion After the Baby Boom. Has anyone seen this book? If you haven't seen this book, it is a really, really boring book. Really boring. You rarely see a recommendation of a book that says, this book was highly boring. But it's really boring, except the introduction and conclusion are fascinating. So what I'm telling you is to go onto Google Books and just read it there. That's what I'm telling you. But this book is fascinating. One of the things that Wuthnow actually shows, and he does this statistically, he can actually say, he shows that the mainline decline, the drop of Presbyterians, Lutherans, Methodists in membership of 12 to 14% over the last decade or so, he thinks has everything to do, he can find this sociologically, empirically, has everything to do with the loss of 18 to 35-year-olds. That the drop is 18 to 35-year-olds. And he even finds in evangelical congregations that when it comes to 18 to 35-year-olds, that there is a plateauing to a slight loss of membership. Mainline liberals, off the table. Evangelicals are losing at a slight rate. But the point is that we're losing these 18 to 35-year-olds. His reason for why this is happening is he believes that sociologically, for some reason, in the American consciousness, religion is a conventional category. In other words, you participate in a religious community when you are living a quote-unquote conventional way of life, which is defined as having a job with some upward mobility, being married, having a mortgage, and most profoundly, having a child. But of course, what's happening, he shows statistically, is that it's now taking longer and longer for these 18 to 35-year-olds to enter into quote-unquote conventional ways of life. That in other words, what he shows, and this correlates with some other research as well, that these young adults don't hate the church. They don't hate it at all. They have really no hard feelings towards the church. The real problem, that's good news. The problem is, they just don't really care. Because they figure the church has nothing for them. And so we're still hoping that somehow at 35 they'll wake up when they have their first child and think, oh, hey, you know what? I should go to church. I guess I would be someone who would go to church. But of course, when that's happening at 35 instead of at 21 or 22, of course we lose a lot of them. And within the congregation, we have a huge issue we have to confront when it comes to our young people, because we used to have this assumption that they would go through our youth ministries, and at 18, they would graduate from high school, they would graduate from the youth ministry, and we kind of knew, wink, wink, that they were kind of graduating from church. We'd stay connected to them when they would come on Easter, when they would come on Christmas, but for the most part, they were gone, but we would stay connected to them through their parents. But we knew that by the time they were 23, 24, they would have a kid and they'd be back in the church, either ours or another. But now we have this issue that we graduate them from the church at 18, and they could be gone until they're 30, 35. And it becomes a huge ramification. So these conventional ways of life connect with the change of work and love. This has huge impact on what the church becomes for these younger generations of people. So my point really is that when work and love are up in the air, when they become more fluid, then so does your self-definition. And this has huge ramifications on how we answer this question, who am I? Now, we've seen this transition from, with work and with love, we've seen this melting, but they've transitioned to a point where there's something about them that's still the same, but I think they've evolved in a certain way that they've changed greatly when it comes to these building blocks of defining ourselves. So my very self-definition, I think, how I define myself in this now cultural context, how I answer this question, who am I, has actually shifted from using work to actually using consumption. That the way I define myself is not what I do in the world, but actually what I own. Now, there's another study that maybe some of you have seen by Christian Smith, and he had done this longitudinal study. It was the largest study ever done on on adolescent-age people, on their spirituality and their religious participation. And then he followed them through high school. He followed them and re-interviewed them again when they were in college. And this book is called Souls in Transition. And the most interesting thing that he finds, there's a bunch of interesting things, and you can imagine a study this big, that he found an incredible amount of diversity in the sample of young adults that he interviewed. I mean, an incredible amount of diversity, to people who loved their church and went all the time, to people who hated their church and never wanted to go, and a ton of them in the middle. And he actually, one of the conclusions, which is just a great sociological conclusion, is that, well, we really can't say. I mean, don't you wish you were in a field where you just say, well, we really can't say. That's the conclusion of this book. We really can't say. So they found an incredible amount of diversity. But one of the things that they found across the sample that all the young adults agreed on, whether they went to church all the time or they hated the church, is they asked them this moral question. They said, is there ever a time that it is wrong, that it is morally wrong to buy something? Is there ever a time that it's morally wrong to buy something? All the young adults agreed across the board, across the sample, that no, it is never wrong. Some of them were willing to add the caveat that if you can't pay for your daughter's food, then you probably shouldn't buy the new iPhone 4. But they all said, if you can afford it, it's never wrong to buy something. And I think when it comes to constructing our identities, we've seen this transition from work actually to consumption. That I don't, we say things like, well, I don't know what he does for a living, but he got him that car. He lives in that neighborhood. Now, I have a cousin who we grew up in the same community just miles from here. And so whenever we get together, he's 3 years older than me, we'll often talk about who have you seen and who have you run into. And of course, now this is a Facebook world, so these people that you hated in high school are back in your life. It's terrible. You get a friend request for these people and you think, I hated you in high school and now I have to see pictures of your kitten. I don't care. Leave me alone. But we'll often talk about, who have you run into, who have you seen, and he's gone on this rant a number of times. 2 or 3 times he's gone on this rant where he'll be at a bar or something and he'll be talking to someone or he'll run into an old acquaintance and they'll come up to him and say, so what do you do for a living? And he goes off. He goes on this rant. Why do people care what I do for a living? I'm so much more than my job. Why do people ask me what I do for a living? Why do they care what I do? Who cares? Why do people care about what I do for a living? Now, he has nothing to be ashamed of. I mean, he sells insurance. He isn't a pimp, Actually, no, I won't go into that. But he hates it. He absolutely 100% hates when anyone asks him what he does for a living. And I participate in this. We never fail to want to talk about new flat screen TVs, new additions on his house, new Jeep Cherokees, that we use what we buy to define who we are. Now, I was actually raised by TV, and this is why I feel like I owe it 6 hours a night. You know what I mean? If your aunt was there for you growing up, you would spend time with her. That's what I do with TV. I turn it off every night and kiss it before I go to bed. But I don't know, I'm sure on your cable dial, or if you have Comcast, you have this, that you have the on-demand button, which is great for a TV-holic like me. So when there's nothing else on, I can watch hours and hours of old Flintstones episodes or something and relive my childhood. But a couple summers ago, I was bored and needed something to watch, so I went on demand and I went to HBO, and there was this great miniseries on, which some of you probably saw. It was the Tom Hanks miniseries called The Earth to the Moon, and it was about the Apollo moon missions. Now, I was raised mainly in the 80s and the early 90s, to such an extent, I'm confessing my sins now, that I dressed my son. It was Famous Person Day at school last week, and I dressed him as Kurt Cobain. I thought that was cool. No one got it, but I thought it was cool. So you see where I fit generationally. And if anyone says anything bad about Nirvana, I will kill you outside. So let's not go there. But so I knew nothing about the Apollo moon missions that happened in the early 1960s and on. And so I watched this miniseries and was just fascinated by this thing. And the thing that stuck out so forcefully to me was the fact that in the culture at this time, these astronauts were celebrities. They were incredible celebrities, and they were incredible people. I mean, many of them had been war heroes. All of them had to be incredibly gifted fighter pilots, that a lot of them were star athletes at the university they were at, and every one of them had to be an incredibly skilled, almost Ivy League educated mathematician to even get into the program. Incredible vocational depth, and it led them to be celebrities in the culture. They sold orange juice, did commercials for orange juice, and were on late night talk shows. Now think of that progression of the astronaut in the early 1960s through to the early 2000s in Paris Hilton. What does Paris Hilton do? What does Kim Kardashian do? I mean, what does Paris Hilton do? Well, we know she does coke. That's what we know she does. But she doesn't do anything. So this progression in just 40 years from an incredibly vocationally deep person as a celebrity, as a voice in the culture, to someone who doesn't do anything. I mean, for God's sakes, we know she can't sing. I mean, she has no real talent, except she does one thing, and one thing incredibly powerful. She buys stuff. And if you watch TMZ, they'll say, and Paris has returned from Europe with 4 trunks full of new European style for the season, that she buys stuff, and we voyeuristically live through what it must be like to be her and to be able to buy all of this stuff. So we use what we buy to define ourselves. Again, I don't know what he does for a living, but it got him that car. He lives in that house. So identity isn't built necessarily on our vocations, but actually on our possessions. Now, I don't know if anyone's seen this study by Richard Florida, who's a demographer, and he's actually done this study on why certain American cities have rebounded and become hotbeds for new business and things like that. Very interesting research. And one of the things he says is he thinks that there's a new class structure that exists in America. And he thinks, of course, there's this new service class that exists, but there's also this new class he calls the creative class. And these are people who are writing copy for advertising agencies and creating websites. And just kind of as a tangent, I actually kind of think that these creative people are the people who would never come to our churches. Because after all, they are making meaning every day at work and constructing stuff, and then they come to our worship services and we ask them to sit there and just to listen as someone else makes meaning, and they just feel like that is the weirdest thing I would ever do. Why would I do that? But Florida has looked at why these certain cities have rebounded and how they've attracted these creative people. And he actually says, which fits our thesis here, he actually says that he's noticed when he's on an airplane now, and his research backs this up, that the question you used to ask your seatmate as you tried to get to know them, or when you introduced yourself, is that you used to say, so what do you do for a living? So that's not the question anymore. The question isn't, what do you do for a living? The question people now ask each other as they sit down is, so where are you from? Which connects very quickly to where you're from, what city do you live, what neighborhood are you in that city, oh, what kind of car do you drive? I mean, it connects to these consumer elements. So we use what we buy actually to define ourselves. And there's good reason for that, is that all I need to really do is stop by the Gap or stop by the Apple store, and I can actually feel like a new person. That I use my consumer goods to redefine myself. I use my fashion to represent who I actually am. And I don't know, this connects really great to the makeover phenomenon. I don't know if you have TLC on your cable dial, but it is essentially the 24-hour makeover station. And if you've ever seen a personal makeover, half-hour show where someone goes from what not to wear to what to wear, or from the ugly duckling to something else, and they all end the same way. They end with the camera in the person's face who has had the makeover, and they're asked to articulate what this experience has been like. And all of them, to a T, every time, when they're asked what this experience has been like, they use evangelical language. They say, this has been an amazing experience. I just feel like a completely different person. I feel all new. I feel like this is the first day of the rest of my life. Well, what's happened here? They got their teeth whitened, they got a new haircut, and they got a new closet full of clothes. But it becomes the very catalyst to feel like an all-new person, to take on a new identity. So I actually use what I buy to define myself. And the great thing, or diabolical thing with easy credit, is that I can go a long way without buying anything, I can go a long way buying stuff without having any money at all. Now, I just finished my basement about 2 years ago. And I don't know what had happened to me. I'd watched too many episodes of This Old House. So I thought, hey, I can do this. So I went into my basement and started to frame up the walls. And the whole idea of this project was that it was going to become a playroom for my kids, and that we would throw all of our toys down into the basement, and then I would lure them down with cookies and lock the door and pour wine for my wife and I, and we would have a great life. So that was the whole object of this project. Well, about halfway through this project, I heard it. I heard the angels sing, and I'm convinced it was from God. I could hear it, oh, because I looked at this wall, and I thought, oh my gosh, a flat screen TV would go perfect right there. And all of a sudden, the project changed from playroom for my kids to home theater for my wife and I. And for the first 6 months, my kids weren't even allowed downstairs. So you will walk around Daddy's TV, and if you touch it with those grubby fingers, you'll be on timeout forever. But I did that very exhilarating and exciting but gross drive to Best Buy, and I loaded up my car with thousands of dollars worth of new equipment. I mean, things I needed, like a flat screen TV, a surround sound system, a Blu-ray player. But the most interesting thing is that I got in my car and I drove home, and I realized about halfway there I didn't pay for any of this. Now, I didn't steal it, but I surely did not write a check for it. my gosh, I didn't pay any cash for it. I didn't even give him one of my credit cards. What essentially I did was sign some papers and open a Best Buy credit card, but I had 18 months, no interest, no payment for 18 months. You can go a long way with buying stuff without having any money at all. All you need is your credit cards. You can go a long way. Now think about this in the context of our young people. I think this is what happens with some of the people we find out in our church in confirmation or something. One of the daughters of a really committed couple in our church who we think are really wise parents, we find out that they've given their daughter a credit card with a $3,000 credit card limit on it. And we think, what? How could you be so stupid? Why would you do that? Well, now hear me say this tongue-in-cheek, but if this is about identity, if this is about constructing your identity around your possessions, how could you keep your kid from getting new jeans when she needs them? How could you keep them from getting a new computer when they want them? I mean, this is like child abuse, isn't it? I mean, how could you do that? This is about identity. For God's sakes, if you had to wait till you had the money till you could buy it, by the time you had the money to buy it, it wouldn't mean anything anymore. It would be old. So how can we do that? Which is actually one of the reasons why, well, where can you find applications for credit cards all over the place, anywhere? College campuses, right? It's become a national conversation because the day that you register for classes, you can sign up for Bio 101, the Ultimate Frisbee Club team, and a Visa Gold card all at the same time. And we've started to wonder, is it really fair to send these kids out of universities with thousands of dollars, $20,000, $30,000 of student loan debt, and $15,000 of credit card debt? But they need it. Now hear me saying this tongue-in-cheek. They need it because this is about their identity. We hamstring them, we hurt them if they can't go and buy the thing once it's there because it doesn't mean anything if they actually have to wait for it. Now that's a huge conversation that we have to have, but it does connect to this idea that we use what we buy to actually define ourselves. So we've seen this transition from work to consumption as being this building block to constructing our identity, but I also think we've seen this transition from love to intimacy. Now, we have to be careful because I'm using these words, and some people like the words, and we transition and use them. But by love, I mean this constant commitment over time. Like we've all had people in our congregation who are, in their 70s or 80s, and all they do is fight all day. Oh, I can't stand him. I just wish I could, I can't stand him. And then you confront him and say, Marie, do you hate your husband, Bobby? Oh, I hate Bobby. I would just like to strangle him. I can't stand him. So, well, why do you stay with him? I mean, he's driving you. Why are you staying with him? She looks at you shocked and says, why do I stay with him? Because I love him. Oh, I hate him, but I love him. I mean, this idea of love as this kind of constant commitment over time, as to seeing intimacy as these electric feelings of closeness. Now, maybe an analogy of this is I won't make you raise your hand if you were into this, but well, maybe I should. But if you were into the Twilight phenomenon or are into the Twilight phenomenon, Twilight phenomenon were these books written for high school girls mainly that became these movies about vampires and such. So it's these movies about, it's a love triangle between Bella the girl and Edward and, yes, okay, see, I knew it. I set you up. I knew it. I was just trying to cover my own trails to seem cool. But it's this love triangle between the vampire Edward and the werewolf Jacob, is that right? See, I did it again. See, I know. But it becomes this love triangle. These books did well, but the movies did amazingly well. And they knew the movies would do fine because they knew high school girls would go who bought the books. But they actually went from successful to incredibly successful hand-over-fist moneymakers for the studios, because not only did high school girls go, but middle-aged women went and loved them. But the most interesting thing about the Twilight phenomenon and all the other vampire stuff out there in our culture, which seems to be everywhere, is that it all plays within the logic and the cadence of intimacy. I mean, put this in a plausibility structure. For instance, some social theorists say that we take on actions that we plausibly imagine that someone like us would do. Within a strict plausibility structure, who really wants to marry a vampire? You know what I mean? Like, who really wants to spend the rest of their life and grow old with a vampire? They don't grow old, people. I mean, they don't get any older. Why do you really want to marry a vampire? Do you want to have a baby with a vampire and have him rocking your child late at night while you're trying to catch some sleep and looking at its neck as its fangs come out? Do you really want to take a werewolf home to meet your mom and dad? No one really wants to marry a vampire or a werewolf. But in the logic of intimacy, it's alluring. your heart beats, and it's dangerous, and it's captivating. Ooh, and you just can't take your hands off him. And the vampire, he just seems so dark and so longing that it all plays within this kind of cadence of intimacy. And I think we've seen this transition where we start to determine our relationships not on something like love as a commitment over time, but on the intimate connections. I mean, how often have we heard people say things like, it's not that I don't love him anymore, it's just that there's nothing there. There's no feelings there. It's not that she isn't still important to me, it's just that we became different people. In other words, as I project my identity out into the future, who I am doesn't connect with who she says who she is. So I'm going to go out and find someone that actually connects. So intimacy are these feelings where you see someone across the room and you just can't take your hands off them. Now I have to confess another thing to you guys, that I have watched every episode that's ever run of The Real World on MTV. Now if you don't know The Real World, it's about 7 strangers picked to live in a house when things stop getting polite and start getting real. You can see the generational gap in the people who laughed at them. People are like, I have no idea what you're talking about. But it's basically the show that's run on MTV about 7 college-age students, young adults who are thrown in a house, and all they really do is drink and have sex and do crazy things. And I've watched every episode of this that's ever run. I feel like I have a streak. I got to keep it going. And sometimes my wife and I watch it on a Wednesday night, and we look at each other like, what are we doing? We're in our late 30s. Why are we watching this crap? But every week, I watch it again. But a few seasons ago, they're always in some American city that they were in Washington, D.C., and I think this just highlights this under this logic of intimacy, that one of the guys had come on the show and he had left a significant relationship behind, and clearly this was now, there was pressure and tension in this relationship. So he's talking to one of these young women, and she turns to him as she's listening to him and she says, you know what, Trey? You know what I think? I just think if it's hard, it shows you it's not meant to be. I think if it's hard, it just shows you it's not meant to be. Now, if you've been in a significant relationship for more than, say, 5 or 10 minutes, you just know it's all hard. That's all it is hard. But that's the very logic of intimacy. Intimacy is never hard. You see that person from across the room and you can't help but be near them. You just want to crawl up inside them. You just want to be with them at every turn. And I think we start to use these intimate connections as the way we start to define ourselves. I feel like I'm missing out on something because I don't have this. Now think about how this changes the church. Now, I am not somebody who likes to do easy kind of generational brackets for people. Like, old people are like this, and young people are like this because they watch these shows, and these people watch these shows. I think culture is much too complicated to assume that just because you were born in these periods, this is the way you are. But, having said that, I think we do run into an issue here. Because in the church right now, we have a significant amount of people who came of age constructing an identity around work and commitment. And another group of people who are now coming of age who have constructed an identity around consumption and intimacy. You have a group of people who see the church as something you work and you're committed to. And you confront these people after the hymnal changes or something, and they are pissed. I mean, Jake is angry. Jake is so angry, he storms out of the meeting. And you come up to Jake and you say, oh my gosh, Jake is going to leave this church. And you come up to him and say, Jake, are you mad? Oh, I am so mad. I could scream, I'm so mad. So Jake, are you going to leave the church? And Jake, 75-year-old Jake looks at you and says, honey, leave this church. I've been mad at this church for 30 years. I'm not going anywhere. And you have another group of people, which I would include myself within this, when simply, I don't know, it seems like the church down the street's doing a better job, or we just go. This church isn't doing anything for me, so we move on. And I actually think, and I don't want to be too dramatic about this, but we're a potential perfect storm here within the church when we have a generation of people who are gone, who have worked these buildings. They have been committed to them, and they've worked them, and people like me come of age. And at my little church in South Minneapolis that my wife's the pastor of, magically on Saturday night, if it snows, when we go to church on Sunday morning, the steps are shoveled. We don't have money to pay someone to do that. Someone in that church, in that congregation, got up early and shoveled those steps. But you know what I think? And I'll be honest about this. I'll tell you right now, I'm not doing it. I don't care. I am not doing it. I am not getting up on Saturday night and shoveling the steps. If that furnace breaks, I'm not spending my Saturday fixing that thing. I'm not doing it. And it's for some good reasons. I would rather give my daughter a bath than fix this. You know what I think? I'll pay someone to do it. Well, except a lot of churches like our little church in South Minneapolis, we're just barely making the budget. So we're going to have a problem, I think, in the context of the church when these people go, and a lot of us, people my age, inherit these buildings, and we don't have the will to manage these buildings. What are we going to do about it? But you do see this conflict, and both ask a good question to each other. I think the older generation asks the younger generation, really? Really, we can construct an identity around consumption and intimacy? That's strong enough to build an identity? But the younger generation asks a good one to the older generation, where they say, well, what are you going to do, turn back the clock? And you're going to ask people to construct identity in a way they're not? You're going to keep preaching and talking about things that don't connect with people? So we run into these issues of what to do about this. Now, why the change? Well, without this sounding too weirdly sci-fi, it has a lot to do, there's a nice kiss for you, it has a lot to do with our experience of time and space. See, it sounds a little weirdly sci-fi. But time and space, as some social theorists actually say, that time and space is not what it used to be. In other words, our technology, the very material we use in culture, has this way of moving us across time and space very quickly. Some of you have been very kind not to have your computers up, but one of the most anxiety-filling experiences I have in the classroom at this institution, where if there's 30 students, there would be about 25 with their computer screens up, is I always know I'm in trouble when I'm talking and making a significant point, and I look over, and the young gentleman in this corner has this wry smile on his face with his computer up. And my first panic is, oh my gosh, is my zipper down? Because I know he'll instant message everyone and I'm in trouble. But of course what's happening, and I'm not naive enough to think this isn't happening, that this young man is in this room, but he's not in this room. He is there, but he's moving through time and space as he has multiple windows open, as he's Facebook chatting with somebody, as he's checking a website, as he's reading a blog, as he's doing multiple different things, that we're always moving through time and space. Now there's some things that I really love, like I really love my kids, I really love my DVR, and I really love my wife. I mean, in that order. I'm kidding. It's my kids, my DVR, my computer, my wife. That's no, but we were one of the first people to get a TiVo, and I noticed after about, TiVo is the DVR where you can record things and then you can fast forward through them. And I noticed after about a week and a half with my TiVo, and if you've ever had a TiVo, you see that you actually can start a show 15 minutes late, and then you can fast forward through the commercials, and you can actually, there's a time bar, and you can actually literally catch up to time. Like when we used to watch Lost, we'd always start at 17 minutes after it started so that we would be able to fast forward through the commercials and catch it right at the end. That you watch yourself catch up to time, which is always really trippy. But I noticed after having my DVR for like 2 weeks that when I would be out doing other things in my life, that I would notice, like in line at the DMV, that my fast forward thumb would start to go. Like I just wanted to fast forward through this moment. Some of you are thinking, yeah, you, right now, come on, fast forward through this crap. I want to go for dinner. But it's amazing how our time and space has changed to the very technology we use. And this is the benefit, actually. This is the real benefit of consumption and intimacy, is that consumption and intimacy are not very time possessive. That consumption and intimacy take very little time at all. All it is the slide of the credit card or a look with someone across the room, and you are in the land of new identity. And when everything is fluid and changing, the benefit of consumption and intimacy is that you can quickly change your identity. And the thing about consumption and intimacy, the other great advantage of it, is that it isn't very very space possessive. It's not dependent on a space. You can buy anywhere. When is Amazon or iTunes closed? They're open all the time. And even the experience of the intimate encounter, you don't need to have that happen within a community. You just need a hotel room at an hourly rate, and you can be in the land of new identity. Now, my son, who's 7 years old, for his 7th birthday, he got really into Angry Birds. You know Angry Birds is the iPhone game that some of you are playing right now? And he got really into it, and he decided what he wanted for his birthday was an Angry Birds setup, which is just a weird thing for someone my age, where we used to have board games and we would want to make them into video games. Now they have video games and they're making them into board games. And they didn't want to call it a board game, they called it a setup, as if that's cooler. But it worked, so we bought him this Angry Birds setup, and he got really into it. But he also got $50 extra for his birthday. So one day I was driving home for soccer practice, and I said, oh, and it's Saturday, I'll take you to a store and you can use your birthday money and get something else. And he said, well, where did you and Mommy get that Angry Birds setup? And I said, oh, well, we got it on Amazon. He said, oh, well, let's go to Amazon. I said, well, you can't really go to Amazon. And he says, oh, okay. I said, you can only, you do it through the computer. And he says, well, but where is Amazon? And I said, well, I don't know. It doesn't really have a place. He said, no, Daddy, I get it. But where is Amazon? Like, where in the world is it? I said, I don't know. I mean, it just is this thing. It's like, no, Daddy, like, where physically is it? I said, I don't know, kid. You just go onto the computer and somehow metaphysically it goes through these things and it shows up at your door. It doesn't have a place. Which is the beauty of Amazon, is it kind of doesn't exist in a space. It just magically, by some fairies, drops stuff at your door to buy. But this is the great benefit of consumption and intimacy, is that you can buy, and it's not bound in a space, and it's not bound in time. All I need to do is stop by the store, buy a new thing, and I can actually feel like an all-new person. But of course, there's a dark side to this. And if you know me well enough, you know there's never a presentation without a dark side. But of course, the dark side of this is that there's really not much in consumption and intimacy that holds you. And the problem with both consumption and intimacy, while they allow for fluid, quick change, which we need in our cultural context, the other problem is that they have very short shelf lives. That consumption and intimacy don't last all that long. And it's no wonder then in our cultural context we have this incredible uptick of people with new real significant forms of addiction called being shopaholics or being sexaholics. Now, I'll admit it, consumption works for me. I don't know if it works for you. I'm not all against it. I kind of like it. When I wake up in the morning and I got something new, I kind of think to myself, I wake up and I think, there's something good in the world. What is it? Oh, I got the new phone. That's what it is. But the problem with it is it doesn't last that long. Now, I don't know if any of you remember giving your children or had as kids this gum that was called Fruit Stripe. Do you remember this gum? Oh, some of you remember it. It was this gum, and it came in packs of 40 sticks. And there was a zebra on the front, and it came in multiple different fruit flavors. Now, if you never had this gum, you have to try it, because it was amazing. You would put the fruit stick into your mouth, and it would literally, your taste buds would explode with delight. I mean, this stuff was absolutely delicious, except there was one tragic flaw to it. One terribly tragic flaw, and I'm not exaggerating with this, it lasted 4 seconds. 1,000, 2, 1,000. So what happened in my family growing up is my mom would take me to the grocery store, and the deal was made that I could get a pack of this gum, and I could chew as much of it as I wanted as long as I stayed behind her and kept my mouth shut. So I would follow her with this stack of gum, and I would start to chew it. Now, I was a genius child growing up, so after I would chew it dead, instead of spitting that piece out, I would take a new piece out and baptize the old piece with the new flavor. So by the time my mom got to the checkout aisle, I had nothing but an empty cartridge and a wad of tasteless gum in my mouth. But it's actually a great analogy for consumption. That consumption actually really works. It really tastes good. But the problem is it doesn't last very long. But that's okay, because all you have to do is go back to the mall and get something else. But you can see how that quickly becomes a habitual pattern that can easily, for some people, lead to an addiction. And after all, what is your identity really built on? I remember after I bought all my home surround system for my basement, Dave Lose and I actually run together. I mean, you wouldn't know it by looking at him, but we actually run together. Come on, that's funny. I planned that out. But I remember Dave coming up, when he came to my house and we got ready to run, he said, "So did you get your stuff?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, enjoy it now, because you'll realize in 2 weeks it doesn't change your life." And that's the problem with consumption. So that doesn't matter. All I have to do is go and buy more and buy more. Or you think about the fact of the rise of sexaholics. I mean, we have someone in our culture who used to have a perfect golf swing and $1 billion in the bank who called himself a sexaholic. Tiger Woods, right? And you think we could go a long way on talking about the Tiger Woods phenomenon, but I think one of the reasons that Tiger Woods still remains fodder for late-night joke and for humiliation after his fall into the ending of his marriage and into all his sexcapades and things like that is that one of the reasons is, one is he hasn't won another tournament. Americans love to forgive people once they're winners. But another huge one is, and this is chauvinistic, but I think it is embedded within our cultural context, is one of the reasons that Tiger's so despised for his decisions is because he had married a Swedish swimsuit model. And one of the chauvinistic kind of narratives that runs through our cultural context is there is nothing more beautiful than a Swedish swimsuit model. And Tiger had married a Swedish swimsuit model. And then we saw the pictures of the women he had affairs with from the IHOP and the Bellagio. And everyone said, they're not as beautiful as his wife. And then we just despised him. How could he cheat on a Swedish swimsuit model with these waitresses? How dare he do that? Well, it fits within this as well. Tiger had been told, because he had all this money, because he was so important, that he could have anything he wanted. And even if you marry a Swedish swimsuit model, there's got to be more to that relationship than just intimate connections. And even for Tiger, short shelf life of those intimate feelings, and he finds himself in a habitual pattern and ends up destroying his life in a certain way. So the problem with consumption and intimacy is that it often will lead us up into nothingness. It'll thrust us into deep question. It'll thrust us to wonder, where do we stand? The very fact in our cultural context that we are absolutely afraid of having our identity stolen shows just how thin our identity really exists upon. So then what do you do? I mean, let's take a little theological turn with our last few minutes here. What do you do with this? I mean, how do you compete with consumption and intimacy with the young people in our congregations? One of the ways you can do is just make church feel like consumption and feel like intimacy. I mean, it is kind of amazing. I go to a lot of these big youth ministry events, and I'm always amazed when I walk through these big ones where there's a ton of stuff being sold. And it's amazing how much stuff you can buy to help your kids be disciples of Jesus. I mean, you can buy t-shirts, you can buy Bibles that look like magazines, you can buy magazines that look like Bibles. I mean, you can buy all of this stuff, and with the idea that if you just get this for your kids, then they'll really love Jesus. They'll have an identity in Jesus. Or you go to the level of intimacy. And I tend to be kind of a fan of praise and worship songs, but it's amazing. And when I talk to my own non-Christian friends, how they always say, that's weird about those. I went to this church and they were playing these praise and worship songs, and what was weird is it was like Jesus is my boyfriend music. It was just weird. And so you can take that route. But I actually wonder if the biblical narrative and the story of Jacob isn't helpful here. And it's probably bad exegesis, but it preaches so tough. But you know the story of Jacob, where Jacob, good Hebrew, with a good Hebrew name, that Jacob actually is his identity. Jacob is the heel, means the heel. That he's coming, and he's known as the heel because he's come into the world holding his older, hairier brother's heel, but he's also known as the heel because he's lived into the name. He's become a con man. And as a good con man, he's made himself a lot of money. I mean, he not only conned his older brother out of his birthright, but then went away and did very successful for himself. I mean, he's a con man. But the day of reckoning has to happen, and he has to actually encounter his older, hairy brother, and it becomes time. So they're going to meet each other on the horizon, and of course Jacob, the real stand-up guy that he is, sees his older brother coming, and he takes all his cattle, and he sends them to his brother. Essentially, in this cultural context, he is giving him suitcases and suitcases filled with cash, saying, hey, don't kill me. You can take this stuff. You can buy stuff. You can get a new computer with this. I mean, you can take this. You can take this stuff, buy it. Doesn't work. His brother keeps coming. And now he gets even more frightened. So now the real stand-up guy that Jacob is, he looks at his wife and looks at his children and sends them to his murderous, what he imagines is his murderous brother. And basically says to them, these are the people I have intimacy with. I mean, in a really kind of dirty way, he says, see my wife? Hey, do what you need to do. I mean, keep me alive. Or look at my 7-year-old daughter. I mean, how could you kill me? Look at how cute she is. You couldn't kill me. Look at how cute she is. I mean, these are the people I have intimacy with. You can't kill them. Doesn't work. Now Jacob's left all alone. And of course, the angel of the Lord shows up. God shows up. And Jacob starts wrestling and wrestling and wrestling, which is completely out of character because Jacob is much more of a runner than he is a fighter. But here he is, wrestling and wrestling and wrestling all the way to daybreak. And finally, this angel of the Lord has to extract himself from the situation, so he touches his hip, knocks it out of socket. But still, again, completely out of character, Jacob will not let him go. And he pleads with him, please bless me, please bless me. The angel of the Lord looks at him and says, what is your name? What is your identity? Who are you? He says, I'm Jacob. It's a confession. I'm the heel. If you have $2, I'll take 5. That's who I am. The angel of the Lord looks at him and says, no. No longer are you Jacob. You are Israel, the one who wrestles with God. I think in the backdrop of this cultural context, what the church needs to become is not communities that play the tune of consumption and intimacy. It's a dead end. But what we need to become are communities and places across generations that actually wrestle with God, that really, truly wrestle with God. But here's the problem. It's a big problem for those of us who are leaders of these communities, that if you wrestle with God, you will always leave limping. And this is a problem. Our missional problem in this cultural context is not that we don't have all the answers. It's that those of us who leave these communities, we don't limp. And we are perceived as liars because we don't. How dare we? How dare we mount the pulpit and preach the word of God and not limp into it? We've had kids in our own congregation, 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, stricken with cancer. How dare we not limp? How dare we not limp? We have people in our churches who haven't been there in months because they suffer from severe depression. How dare we not wrestle with this? How dare we not ask, what is a lifetime and why do we live it? Who is this God who loves us and yet we yearn? I think the way that we deal with this kind of cultural reality is that it will leave us empty-handed, and this becomes the place to really wrestle with God, the place to actually really become church. Now, I told you at the beginning that my wife and I traveled around the world with the money she'd won in this preaching prize. Well, we finally got to Europe, and we started backpacking around Europe. And if you've ever backpacked around Europe, you know that when you meet people, there's a certain form of conversation. And what was happening is that we were on an overnight train from Florence into Nice. And we were, living on like $10 a day, $10 to $30 a day. And so we had to share a sleeper car. And I tell you, it's scary to have to share a sleeper car overnight with some strangers that are literally an arm's length away. You're thinking they're going to kill us in the middle of the night. I've seen enough horror movies to know that this is what happens, So we were nervously waiting for these people to come into our sleeper car. Well, we were relieved because this young couple about our age came in from Montreal. And so we started talking. And like I said, there's a code of conversation when you backpack around Europe. And the first thing you talk about is, where have you been? So we shared where we had been, and they shared where they had been. When that conversation's over, you talk about where you're going. Now, where they were headed was from Nice. They were going to use their French. Then they were headed to Barcelona because the wine was flowing, the clubs were hopping, and the weather was warm. Now, we were the nerds on the theological tour. So we were headed to Nice, up to Switzerland, to Geneva to see Calvin sites, then around the Lake of Lausanne into Basel to see Karl Barth's house, before into Nuremberg for the night, taking a bus to Flossenburg to see the concentration camp Bonhoeffer was killed, before up to Germany to do a walking tour of Berlin. Now, we didn't quite tell them all that because we knew we were nerds. So we just said, we're going to Switzerland and Germany. And they looked at us like we were crazy. They're like, your rail pass will take you to Spain. You should go to Spain. We're like, yeah, I know. But then the third thing you talk about is, what do you do back home? So Cara and I launched into our new identities. She was going to be a pastor. I was going to be an academic theologian. And the looks on their face were priceless. Now they were convinced we were the ones who were going to kill them in the middle of the night. And the young woman's jaw dropped and she said, oh, cool. You hear it. She's not, she says cool, but she doesn't mean cool. So then she figures she's got to say something or we are going to kill her in the middle of the night. So she says, well, I went to confirmation when I was a kid. And we said, you are fine, child. Go in peace. And then she continued and she said, I went to confirmation when I was a kid. She goes, but I got kicked out of confirmation because I asked too many disturbing questions. Now, I am usually the person who thinks of the perfect thing to say 15 minutes after it's appropriate. If you had an aerial view of me in a fight with my wife, you would see us settle the conversation, me walk away, and then think, oh, wait, I know why you're wrong, and try to reignite the fight. Not a good strategy. But in this particular situation, I thought of the perfect thing to say at the moment. And she said, I got kicked out of confirmation because I asked too many disturbing questions. And I turned to her and I said, I think that's too bad, because I think the best theologians ask the most disturbing questions. In a backdrop of an identity being constructed around consumption and intimacy that are so weak and quickly fail, why isn't the church a place where we ask our most disturbing questions? Where we wrestle with God and with each other, where there's the freedom to yearn, there's the freedom to articulate this. I don't think younger generations of people want their sermons to be like sitcoms and their praise music to be like U2 concerts. I think they want a place, maybe even a small community, that will really wrestle with them, that will allow them the freedom to ask their most disturbing questions, that will have something to say both in proclamation and in just simply articulation of the human condition. Now, in my family, it's my job to put Owen, my son, to sleep at night. We made a terrible parenting mistake that we had allowed him to watch HBO. Now, he was only 4 at the time, but I figured, when are kids going to learn about the mob in America? There was a Sopranos marathon on, and I thought, this kid just has to watch this thing. No, we let him watch a children's programming, and it was they had animated these poems. And one of the poems was, I have a nightmare in my closet. So this night I'm putting him to bed, he becomes convinced he has a nightmare in his closet. Now you have to know, I got to get this kid to bed, because once this kid's to bed, I can do very important things with my life, which watch hours and hours of terrible reality TV. So I'm thinking, come on, I got to get this kid to sleep, because there's a marathon of the Housewives of Orange County. I got to get this kid to sleep. So he says, Daddy, I have a nightmare in my closet. I said, Owen, you don't have a nightmare in your closet. He said, yes, Daddy, I know there's a nightmare in my closet. So I said, Owen, what if I turn on the light and you'll see there's no nightmare in your closet? Looks at me like, yeah, that's great. So turn on the light, we go, we move some toys around, and I kind of go to his rational side, and I say, Owen, see, there's no nightmare in your closet. He says, no, there's no nightmare. So all right, get back in bed. Get back in bed, tuck him in, turn off the light, and he yells, it's back. The nightmare's back. So I'm thinking, what am I going to do? I got to get this kid to sleep. What am I going to do? So it dawns on me, perfect idea. I know what I'll do. I'll turn to my religion. So I say to him, Owen, why don't we pray and ask Jesus to be here with you so you don't have to be alone and that you won't be afraid? And he looked at me like this was the best news that he had ever heard. And he said, yes, Daddy, pray for me. And so I did. I said, Jesus, please come and be with Owen right now. He's scared and he needs someone to be with him. Please come, Jesus, and be with Owen right now. Amen. And I kissed him on the head. And I thought to myself, what will I do with the Father of the Year plaque? You know, I'm amazing. I can't believe it. So just then I turn and I'm about to walk out and he says, Daddy, wait. I said, what is it, Owen? He says, well, where's Jesus? And I said, well, Owen, we prayed and Jesus is here. He said, well, I don't see Jesus. And I said, yeah, I know, but see, that's how you work when you pray. You can't see Jesus, but Jesus is here. Jesus is here with you. He says, no, Daddy, Jesus isn't here. I said, no, Owen, this is how it works. When you pray, Jesus comes and is with me. He's like, Daddy, I'm scared and I don't see Jesus. And I'm saying, Owen, listen to me, kid. I have 3 advanced theological degrees. This is how it works. Shut up and go to bed. And finally, he looks at me, and his eyes get big, and that one tear comes down that paints his cheek. And he looks at me right in the eyes, choked up, and he says, Daddy, I am scared, and Jesus isn't here. And you wonder about that. I think we have a generation of people who have tried to construct an identity around consumption and intimacy, have been forced to, because in many ways we all are, and it's failed, and it will fail. And they have big damn nightmares in their closet. And you know what they see in the church? Just platitudes. Just everything will be okay. Just Jesus is with you. Just keep praying, things will be all right. No one who will wrestle with him in the dark night of the soul. No one who wants to do faith, seeking understanding, and wrestle with God in the midst of it. Just platitudes to live by. Final story. The great story about Dietrich Bonhoeffer, which of course Dietrich Bonhoeffer we know very little about. We know a ton about, obviously. We have a 1,000-page biography about him, but we know very little about what he thought about his own life. We have very little of him reflecting on his own life, which would be very interesting. I mean, martyr of the 20th century, it would be really interesting to know what he thought about his own faith development and things like that. We have one letter, however, that he wrote to Eberhard Bethge where he talked about his childhood and talked about his past. And he writes Eberhard Bethge and he says, there's 2 things that impacted me more than anything else in my past. He says, the first thing that impacted me more than anything else was the time I spent in New York City in 1930, 1931. If you know his biography, you know some of the reasons why that was significant. But he says the second thing that impacted me more than anything else, he said, was Papa's personality. And he's referring to his father, Karl Bonhoeffer. And if you know anything about the Bonhoeffer family, you know that they were a large family, 7 children. And Karl Bonhoeffer was a very important man and a Berliner of Berliner. I mean, he was a German's German. He rarely smiled. He was all business. He was actually the chair of psychiatry at the University of Berlin. And if you know your World War II history, it was actually Karl Bonhoeffer who did the psychological review on the young man that the National Socialists had framed for burning down the Reichstag so Hitler could take over both the presidency and chancellor within himself. That Karl Bonhoeffer was the ranking psychological voice in all of Germany, and he did the psychological review to determine if this young man was fit for trial. He said he was fit for trial, and they killed him. So a very important man. So Dietrich's reflecting on his childhood and saying the thing that impacted me more than anything else was Papa's personality. And what he meant is that when the kids would come to dinner, that they were absolutely 100% not allowed to speak unless they had been spoken to. And when they did speak, Karl Bonhoeffer demanded with an iron will that when his children spoke, they spoke directly. So for instance, if little Sabine came to the table and they asked her, Sabine, how was your day at school? If Sabine said, well, you know, it was kind of like, I guess sort of, kind of, he would pound his fist on the table as hard as he could and yell, speak directly, demanded of his children. So now as an adult, Dietrich is writing to his friend and saying, the thing that impacted me more than anything else was Papa's personality. And we're thinking, yeah, of course, because the guy was a raging jerk. But Bonhoeffer didn't mean it that way. He says to Bethge, the one thing I think I learned from Papa is that when one does theology, when one does ministry, one must speak directly. There is no room for phraseology. And I think we have an American church that's absolutely addicted to sugary phraseology because it feels like consumption and intimacy. But I think we have generations of people who are waiting for communities, maybe small, maybe insignificant communities, that are actually ready to wrestle with God, that are actually ready to be there and wrestle with Him in the midst of it, to dwell with them as they do so. Let me pray for us. God, we thank you for the blessing of this calling. It is one that comes with confusion and sorrow, but it is also one that comes with great beauty. And remind us, even now, even through these next few days, that it is a blessing to wrestle with people, to seek for questions that have no easy answers, that it is our great privilege to seek for you in the midst of our lives. So God, I pray for us that we might be courageous, that we might have the courage and the sight to find you at work in the world and to join you in those dead places, knowing that where there is death, God, that you promise to bring forth life. So give us the courage to see death and call it what it is, trusting that from dry bones come new life. Bless us, God. Amen. Thanks, guys.
First, a word of thanks. Andy, I think of the many, many important things you said, two will stay with me as important and true. One, the allure and the power and peril of consumption and intimacy as a backdrop in which we do ministry and the need to speak directly. And two, that your wife, Cara, really is the talented one of the family. Sincerely, our thanks.